Welcome to Fable Sonder, where every story inspires and connects. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment to support us. Now let's dive into today's tale. Sit back and enjoy.
Fable Sonder, the stories of hidden life.
The morning dew still clung to the tall grass as Aubrey Matthews adjusted the wide-brimmed hat that protected her from the emerging Alabama sun. Her worn leather boots made soft squelching sounds as she walked along the edge of Chiha State Park, the wicker basket swinging gently from her arm. The rain had come down hard the day before, turning the rich red soil into a forager's promise. At least, that's what her grandfather had always said. "Lord have mercy, Aubrey, don't tell me you're actually going mushroom hunting." Jasmine Parker's shrill voice cut through the peaceful morning air from her pristine front porch, where she sat perched like a sentinel in her favorite rocking chair. Aubrey turned slowly, forcing a polite smile. "Morning, Jasmine. Beautiful day, isn't it? Beautiful day for wasting time," Jasmine snorted, setting her coffee cup down with an audible clink. "You do know there hasn't been a single mushroom worth picking in these woods for months now. Even old Bill Thompson gave up, and that man would hunt for mushrooms in a parking lot if he thought he could find some." "Well, you never know unless you try," Aubrey replied, her smile never wavering. 20 years of living next door to Jasmine had taught her the art of selective hearing. "I swear, girl, you've lost your mind completely." Jasmine stood up, hands on her hips, her floral house dress swaying in the morning breeze. "Everyone knows this is the worst mushroom season in decades. My cousin Martha's boy, you remember him, the one who makes those fancy cooking videos, even he said there's no point in looking." Aubrey adjusted her basket and kept walking, Jasmine's voice following her like a persistent mosquito. "Don't come crying to me when you waste your whole morning and come back empty-handed. And watch out for them copperheads." As Aubrey reached the tree line, she could still hear Jasmine muttering to herself about fool's errands and people having more money than sense. The sweet scent of pine needles and damp earth welcomed her as she stepped into the forest's embrace, leaving her neighbor's negativity behind. She couldn't help but smile, remembering all the times her grandfather had taken this same path, teaching her the secrets of the forest. While others dismissed it as worthless, the forest, he'd always said, keeps its best treasures for those patient enough to look for them. The morning sun filtered through the canopy above, creating shifting patterns on the forest floor as Aubrey made her way deeper into the woods. She knew exactly where she was going, even though she hadn't taken this path in months. Some things, like the way to her grandfather's secret spot, were etched into her memory as deeply as the worn paths beneath her feet. The wetlands were waiting ahead, and beyond them, an island that had been her family's secret for generations. As she ventured deeper into the forest, leaving the sounds of civilization behind, Aubrey felt the familiar excitement building in her chest. She might be the only person in town crazy enough to go mushroom hunting today, but sometimes, she knew, being crazy was exactly what you needed to be. The deeper Aubrey ventured into the forest, the more the morning mist clung to her clothes like a second skin. Her boots sank slightly into the soft ground with each step as she made her way toward the wetlands. The familiar path was there, hidden beneath years of natural camouflage, but finding it felt like trying to recall the details of an old dream. Now, where was that marker? She muttered to herself, scanning the trees. Her grandfather's voice echoed in her memory, clear as if he were walking beside her. "Look for the twin pines, sugar. Nature's got a way of pointing the right direction if you know how to read her signs." There they were, two ancient pine trees, their trunks twisted together like lovers in an eternal embrace. Aubrey smiled, remembering how she had once thought it was magic that made them grow that way. Her grandfather had laughed, explaining how saplings sometimes fused together, becoming one tree with two souls. The island's out there, he had said on their first journey together. Where nobody else thinks to look. Even if the whole world turns barren as a parking lot, that place will still give up its treasures to folks who respect it enough to find it. The ground grew softer beneath her feet as she followed the nearly invisible trail. Most folks would have turned back at the first sight of the wetlands, seeing nothing but trouble and soggy boots, but Aubrey knew better. She had learned every safe stepping stone, every solid patch of ground between here and Raven Island. The morning silence was broken only by the occasional plop of something dropping into the water and the distant call of birds. Aubrey picked her way carefully through the wetlands, muscle memory guiding her feet to each safe spot. One wrong step could mean a boot full of water, or worse. Funny how nobody's ever found this place, she said softly to herself, ducking under a low-hanging branch. Then again, people see what they expect to see, and nobody expects to find anything worth finding out here. The mist was starting to lift as the sun climbed higher, revealing glimpses of her destination through the trees. Raven Island rose from the wetlands like a dark secret, its bare cypress trees reaching toward the sky like gnarled fingers. Some might have found it forbidding, but to Aubrey, it was beautiful in its own way, like a sanctuary that had chosen to remain wild and mysterious while the world around it grew tame. Her grandfather's words came back to her once more. That island's been feeding our family longer than anyone can remember. It's got its own kind of magic. Not the fairy tale kind, but the real kind, the kind that comes from being left alone to grow exactly as nature intended. As she approached the island's edge, Aubrey felt the familiar thrill of anticipation. The rest of the town might think she was crazy for coming out here, but she knew better. Sometimes, the best things in life were the ones you had to work a little harder to find. The first step onto Raven Island always felt like crossing into another world. The ground beneath Aubrey's feet changed from wetland muck to surprisingly firm soil, carpeted with years of fallen cypress needles. The canopy above was so dense that it turned the morning light into perpetual twilight, and the air hung still and heavy with the earthy scent of decay and renewal. "Well, let's see what you've got for me today," Aubrey whispered to the island, setting her basket down beside a gnarled tree trunk. The darkness that had seemed forbidding from the outside now felt almost cozy, like being wrapped in a well-worn quilt. She didn't have to look far for her first discovery. There, nestled against the base of a cypress knee, was a cluster of oyster mushrooms, their pale gray caps overlapping like fallen dominoes. Aubrey's heart quickened as she knelt to examine them. "Would you look at that?" she breathed, running her fingers gently over the delicate edges. Fresh as morning dew and perfect as a picture. She could almost hear Jasmine's incredulous squawk if she could see these beauties. Working methodically, Aubrey harvested the mushrooms with the careful precision her grandfather had taught her. "Never take them all," his voice reminded her in memory. "Leave some to spread their spores. The forest provides for those who respect its ways." The island had once again proved its magic. Aubrey's basket grew steadily heavier, and as she looked around, she couldn't help but smile, knowing she'd found something worth the effort. Aubrey chuckled softly as she heard Ryan's heavy sigh and slow footsteps, deciding to spare him the spectacle and continue toward her own house. Behind her, Jasmine's voice echoed across the yards, scolding Ryan for his laziness. "I swear, Ryan Parker, you are the laziest man in Alabama. Other folks are out there making something of themselves, and what are you doing?" "Nothing." Aubrey smiled as she reached her house, where her father greeted her with a warm smile. He held the door open as she stepped inside, his eyes lighting up at the sight of the basket she carried. "Looks like the island was generous today," he said. Aubrey nodded, placing the basket on the counter. "Sure was, Daddy," she replied, grateful for the cool air of the house. But that's not all that happened out there. As she began unpacking the mushrooms, she shared that she had found a lost boy on the island. He had been out there since the previous day, all the way from Gulf Shores, separated from the group of local kids he had gone mushroom hunting with. "Poor thing was scared half to death when I found him," Aubrey continued. "But I pointed him in the right direction, so he should be home by now." Her father raised an eyebrow at the mention of Gulf Shores. "That's quite a wandering," he remarked. Aubrey smiled softly, her father's words reminding her of her mother's similar acts of kindness. "You always did have a way of being in the right place at the right time, sugar," her father said. Aubrey paused, feeling the warmth spread in her chest at the rare mention of her mother. The two shared a brief, knowing look, as the sounds of Jasmine's tirade about Ryan's lack of ambition drifted through the air. "Reckon Ryan's going to be out in these woods tomorrow, hunting for mushrooms that ain't there," her father chuckled. Aubrey grinned. "Well, at least it'll give him some exercise," she replied, turning her attention back to cleaning her harvest. Years passed, each one flowing like water in a stream, with the rhythm of life carrying Aubrey through its changing seasons. She watched her son Julian grow from a curious boy into a capable young man, excelling in his studies and bringing home track medals that now lined the walls of their modest home. Aubrey's father often sat on the porch, watching Julian practice his running on their long driveway, commenting with pride, "That boy's got your determination and your mama's grace." The decision to send Julian to engineering school hadn't been easy. Even with scholarships, tuition was steep, but Aubrey never regretted it. She took on extra shifts, and her father contributed what he could from his pension, making it work. "You're spoiling that boy," Jasmine would often comment, always ready with her opinion. All that money for fancy education when he could be working right here in town. But Aubrey knew better. She had seen the spark in Julian's eyes when he talked about building things, solving problems, the same spark she had recognized in herself when her grandfather first showed her the secret path to Raven Island. Then one Sunday morning, Julian showed up unexpectedly at their door, his face pale and his voice thick with emotion. "Mama, I need to tell you something," he said, sitting down with her at the kitchen table. With his hands tightly clasped together, Julian explained that he had defended a girl being harassed outside the library. "I couldn't just walk by, Mama," he said, his voice breaking. "But now they're saying I attacked them first, and they're threatening to press charges unless..." He named the sum they were demanding, more money than Aubrey had ever seen in one place. The police had witnesses, and Julian suspected the girl had been scared into changing her story. Aubrey's heart clenched as she promised, "We'll figure this out, baby. We'll find a way." But as she spent the next few days going door to door, trying to gather enough money to save her son, the reality of their situation hit hard. Even with every favor called in and every penny scraped together, they were far from the amount needed. That night, after Julian had gone to bed, Aubrey sat with her father on the porch swing. Her father, sensing her thoughts, spoke quietly, "I know what you're thinking. You're thinking about going to the bank tomorrow." Aubrey nodded, the weight of the decision heavy on her heart. "I don't see any other way, Daddy." His hand found hers, his weathered skin against hers. "You do what you need to do. That boy's worth every penny and more." The next day, Aubrey found herself at the Nashville Central Bank, clutching her folder of documents, nervous but determined. The loan officer led her into a sleek office where the conversation quickly turned to the substantial sum she needed to borrow. Aubrey explained her situation, hoping that her clean record and determination might convince him to help. The officer left to speak with his supervisor, and minutes later, a tall man in an expensive suit entered the room. His eyes widened in recognition. "Miss Aubrey?" he said. It took a moment for Aubrey to place him, but then it hit her, Caleb, the boy she had found years ago on the island. "I can't believe it's really you," he said with a grin. Caleb, now the financial director at the bank, quickly moved to help her. As she explained Julian's situation, Caleb's expression grew serious, and within the hour, he had set things in motion. By late afternoon, Caleb's phone calls had unraveled the scam Julian had been caught in. The two young men who had threatened him were sitting in uncomfortable leather chairs, their bravado melting under the scrutiny of the police. With the help of a corrupt detective, they had staged the harassment and tried to extort money from Julian. Aubrey watched in stunned silence as Caleb's actions ensured that her son would not be arrested or have his future ruined. When the police captain turned to her and said, "Your son showed real courage," Aubrey felt the weight lift from her chest. By evening, Caleb insisted on driving Aubrey home. As they pulled up to her house, Julian and her father were waiting on the porch, and even Jasmine, peering through the curtains at the luxury cars in their driveway, couldn't help but comment. Aubrey smiled as Caleb introduced himself to Julian and her father. It was a moment of justice, of magic, and of kindness coming full circle. Later that night, after Julian had returned to school with a lighter heart, Aubrey sat with her father on the porch swing, the familiar song of a whippoorwill calling out in the night. "You know, Daddy," she said softly, "I think I might take Julian out to the island sometime, show him the path just like Granddaddy showed me." Her father nodded, his eyes understanding. Some trails are worth keeping in the family.